So there's a lot of guys probably here in the seminar that are, outfitted with a boat very similar to mine, a smaller size boat, 20 foot or less. And you're probably just in this midst of, if you're new to the sport, getting ready to rig that boat up. And you can see in the screen here, Mark just left. There's all sorts of equipment that you can add to a boat. I see Fish Hawk right there on the screen, and sonars and all sorts of stuff. But yeah, you can certainly rig your boat up to be a fishing machine, and we're so lucky to be where we are in southern Ontario, enjoying both Lake Ontario and Lake Erie fishing, world class fishing, folks. I mean, the salmon fishing is still very, very good, although certainly not what it used to be, even 5 or 6 years ago. It is still exceptional, folks. And then Lake Erie, well, world world class fishing on Lake Erie for bass and for walleye, and we got lots of perch out there too.
Okay, so we'll get going into the discussion, and just a little disclaimer before we get going. Like, there's many different ways to go about setting up your boat and different choices for tackle and whatnot. And Shane and I are just kind of explaining what has worked for us and what we've done well with over the years. There's obviously many ways that guys do things, and not to say some are better and worse than others. I think they're all effective at the end, but we're just sharing what's worked best well for us. So, and there's always ways to tweak things one way or the other. So Shane, well, let's talk about boat setup, because before anyone can get out there and experience the good fishing, we got to be sure that all the essentials are in place, and then we'll talk about some nice additional features which are nice to have but maybe not necessary right off the bat. So I know you've got some diagrams and some pictures prepared to walk us through, because you just went through that process of rigging up your boat last spring.
That's right. Yeah, no, for sure. Yeah, rigging a boat is certainly not. It's not something you just want to jump into. You really want to kind of do your background research on how you want to rig your boat, and don't be of this mindset that because you have a smaller boat that you can't fish like the big boys do with the big boats. You certainly can. Boats, 16, 17 footers, you can equip your boat to fish big, big water with big fish in mind. Here's an example. A friend of mine from Grimsby. I don't know if he's on the call. I hope he is. John Poirier, and his 17-foot Lund. I fished with him for many years in that boat, and we caught a whole mess load of salmon and walleye trolling in it. But you can see you can rig these boats up to fish big for those big fish. Yes, when we're talking about salmon and trout and walleye fishing and trolling in particular, there's lots of equipment out there, lots of things to think about, to talk about, to plan for rigging your boat so that you have it all well set. You could be looking at a boat that is maybe fairly old and it needs to be updated, and there could be many advantages of adding newer equipment to even an older boat and making it more fishable. Or you could be starting fresh and looking at bringing in your own boat and just kind of thinking about what it is that you're going to do with it. It could be completely naked, if you will, without any equipment at all, even electronics, buying the boat straight from a dealer, and you're really faced with a boat that needs all of the rigging right fresh. So again, a big boat, certainly. Well, obviously, when you're planning for this thing, it's all about what you're going to be doing with the boat, where you're going to be placing things, and how much money do you have so that you can plan why you're going to pick one thing over another thing to add to your boat. I mean, if the sky's the limit, you can certainly weigh down the boat with a whole lot of equipment, but that in itself may not be as productive if you don't really put a plan in place in order to start to rig your boat the way you need it. So here's where I would recommend when you're talking about your boat, break it down into different areas of interest. And in those areas of interest, you might be thinking, well, I'm just a troller, so I'm only interested in the back of the boat. I don't think that that's the right approach. Each piece of the boat is really important to you as a troller, and especially for the small boat guys, you need the space. You need to use the boat in its full capacity so that you can accommodate all of the equipment that you want, but also to have it operate the way you want. When it comes to trolling, we're often talk about precision trolling, trolling precisely so that you're angling your boat along, let's say, a drop off or something of that sort. All of these things, when it comes to boat control, there's elements to where you place things in the boat and how they operate to provide you your presentation and boat control in those scenarios. So breaking it down, we're looking at the front of the boat as being an important part, yes, even for the troller. And we'll talk a little bit about why that might be in a bit. We talk about the side gunnels, and we're talking about what kind of equipment we want to place in it. We have the rear part of the Abaft Gunwales, where we would be placing other sorts of equipment, and then across the stern or the transom, depending on the style of boat you have. So these different areas, they function slightly different when you talk about mounting equipment on them. And then, of course, you have the helm for your electronics. All right, so looking at the front of the boat. So what are we looking at here? We want to add things like your electronics that may be hooked up to your bow mount electric. And really also what you could also add is a planer board mast. So if you're looking at using big ski planer boards, you can use the mast that's placed as far forward in the boat as possible. So right beside the electric trolling motor, if you can mount a little 6-inch track, very similar to what you see here. At Grimsby Tackle, you have Canon tracks that you can buy and purchase, mount them right there. And a lot of the masts that you can buy now, they slide right into the track. Perfect for that scenario where if you're going up north and you don't need the big mast in there, you can slide it back off again. The electric trolling motor, really probably the biggest advancement when it comes to boat control. And here's where I talked about, even the front of the boat, even if you, as a troller, the front of the boat is essentially a very important part to boat control now, because we're using these electric trolling motors, the iPilot, in order to maneuver the boat. See, it's always easier to steer a boat from the bow than it is from the stern. If you ever think about it, you're turning the wheel, and when you're turning the wheel and changing the keel at the stern of the boat, it usually often means that the boat lags a bit before it starts to turn. Meanwhile, if you're steering the boat from the bow, electric trolling motor for an example, you can easily be able to steer the boat, and it really does turn very quickly. So it's an excellent means of managing your direction on the boat. And also too, I mean, iPilot being hooked up to GPS, your global positioning system, it's now able to track. You're able to keep a track or a bearing, so that you're not spinning in circles. If you ever been in a boat where maybe your steering is a little bit loose and you let go of the steering to go grab a rod at the back, and all of a sudden the boat's starting to do a turn on you. Well, there's your example of how the electric trolling motor will keep you straight. And even though you left the helm for a second, the boat is still tracking in a straight line. They are usually also, as you can see on the bottom right-hand corner, manipulated by a handheld unit. And that is really, really handy. So back in, 15, 20 years ago, before we had iPilot and this ability to communicate with your electric trolling motor anywhere in the boat, you would have to go up in the front and control the boat in its direction with a foot pedal. And of course, back then, the tool for a electric trolling motor for a troller's perspective, that wasn't really advantageous, especially if you have to go grab a rod at the back of the boat. You're not going to have your foot on the foot pedal. Um, so yeah, certainly the remote is a very handy piece of equipment. And you can go from anywhere in the boat and steer the boat. I often am steering the boat from the back of the boat using my little remote. All right, so looking at, when we're planning to put equipment on your boat, you're really kind of thinking about the types of equipment. A couple of slides ago, we talked about there's all sorts of equipment that you can add to the boat. But really what it comes down to is, that equipment and how we place baits in what we call these groups. If you're breaking down your spread or your complete presentation of all of the lures hanging off the boat, all of those would be presented in these different facial areas behind the boat. And I'm just going to admit all. So we got a bunch of people waiting in the waiting room. I'm sorry about those folks. Here we go. They're coming in. So the inner group there is the area that's closest to the boat. It's our presentations that are immediately usually on downriggers down below the boat. And it's for the musky guys, it could be a prop wall, okay, and that's in that inner group. It's very, very close to the boat. That middle group for salmon guys, man, oh man, that middle group is probably the most popular group of all. And that's your divers. Yeah, that's your divers off the side of the boat, or maybe even short cores or long lead downriggers. Your outer group, on the other hand, is where you're talking about using planer boards. You're using lead core lines, stretching out what we call junk lines, copper line for an example, and getting it out away from the boat. And we're also looking at it from this perspective of what we call the big V. It's really looking at spreading the lures outward, both out to the side, but also in a V pattern going down into the water column, the deepest line being below the boat or in the inner group. And then as you further go away from the boat out towards the planer boards and whatnot, you're usually higher in the water column. So that V pattern is what we really try to achieve. And that really helps with rod management, keeping lines away from one another so we don't collide. There's your V. So there's also that idea of a V pattern that's happening below the boat, as we said. So in that inner group, that downrigger will be the deepest part. Meanwhile, out off the planer boards would be your longer leads, usually copper and lead core line and that sort of thing. All right, so let's get into mounting some things along the gunwales. So here we're talking a lot about managing some of your planer board rods. They're usually placed in either rod trees or in rod cradles, or even tube rod style rod holders. And all of those things can be certainly mounted along the side of the boat there. This is really, really handy for those that are using inline planer boards, for an example, where you don't have necessarily the mast up in the front of the boat. You can use your inline planer boards strictly from the rod holders that are placed in your gunwales. So here's an example, very basic example of what that might be. Here, what we see is on the bottom is a cradle style type rod holder. I don't recommend using plastic. Okay, folks, if you're running divers, for an example, especially for salmon, don't use plastic. Get into some of the metal stuff. At Grimsby Tackle, they have the Canon rod holders, excellent rod holders to use. And then if you're getting into more of the planer board rods, you can certainly get into the Lexan, as you see here in that picture, plastic style. Mark is showing on his screen there the Salty, the S15. Excellent. Mark, yeah.
Yep. So these lend themselves well to boats with thinner gunnels. So you clamp them on, or you can get adapters if you do want to put it into a track. There are some riser adapters that will slide into the track and still allow you to get them on. There's also, they have a couple other different models too that allow you to, with the plates on the bottom that you can bolt into to your gunnel or to different receptacles as well. So and they're not very expensive, and they're very handy. And you know, you can use them when you're up north fishing. And these have been long favored by muskie trollers as well for this design. So they're good. And here's the Canon one that Shane was talking about too. The tube style. You know, Bert's and Big John and others have very similar designs too. So
yep, absolutely.
Yeah, Tight Lock also has probably the most economical one and still of a decent quality for an aluminum tube style one. And we will be getting some of those in the winter time as well. And they're a little bit less cost than the Canon and other ones, but they don't have the same you know, ability to rotate and adjust as infinitely as the Canons do. But they're still good quality for those starting out.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, what you see in the picture is a very small, I'm going to say probably a 12-inch piece. You certainly, if you can, get a longer piece. So because we're talking about track systems and tracks primarily when we're getting into, you know, adding some rod holders along the side of the boat, the longer you can make your track, the better off it is, because number one, it carries the weight, carries the torque, carries all of the added pressure when you add more rods to it. It's going to be mounted onto the gunnel, you know, with multiple bolts. Okay, so that you add some greater strength, but also too, it gives you versatility. It allows you to be able to slide those rod holders along the track and adjust them with space between them that makes it more favorable to you. So one of the things too, I mean, tracks, they are coming to you in a specific size. Here's a Canon track.
Yep.
And
I just want to interrupt one section.
Yep.
This last week, Martin has been talking to someone, and now we're able to get some bulk big pieces of track, and Martin is able to cut them down into specific custom sizes to suit the needs of different individual boats. But you are right. Canon does have about 4 or 5 different sizes, but we have the ability to make them at the right size now, and probably at a better cost perhaps too. So.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, a lot of people say, well, I don't want to cover my entire gunnel up because it makes it look too industrial like. But there's also inserts that you can slide in these as well, the little Lexan or plastic inserts that actually make it look very aesthetically pleasing. So you're not limited in that respect. So yeah, it also, you know, taking to consideration the width of your gunnel, so that your gunnel is able to carry the entire width of the track. And if it doesn't, there's also other alternatives. So if you have an aluminum boat that has a very thin gunnel, you could have some form of mounting such as this, where it's on the pedestals and the track system is mounted on a pedestal system. And then now you're operating just the same way with the track at the height of your gunnel. So proper installation, you know, Martin has been doing installations and did all of my installations for my Ranger 620. He mounted all the things on the boat that I needed, rod holders, and I mean, I could certainly have done that myself. However, it's really nice to know that you're getting putting the stuff on the boat in a professional way. And certainly Martin's services doing that, I do recommend. He uses, he's got a full gamut of tools at his leisure that he can use in order to mount all of the equipment on. Um, he can use, the silicone or whatever it is to keep all of your bolts from allowing water to leak inside the gunnel. So all of these things certainly, take into consideration when you're going to install. You can always look to call Martin at Grimsby Tackle to do your installs.
Yeah, just to add to that, Shane, even if you are capable of doing the work yourself, but you got some questions or you're not sure, you need an idea or two, by all means, you can bring your boat here, and Martin can kind of check it out and walk you through the process and make some suggestions and ideas along the way, even if you are capable of doing it yourself or have someone else that can do it. So we're certainly here to help you brainstorm along the way if you kind of hit a little bump in the wall along as your plans, because some of the boats can be kind of finicky for the room that you can allow to access things or to make sure things are fastened properly.
Right. Now, I wanted to give you an example of something you don't want to do. As you can see on the screen, using a small piece of track and trying to crowd everything on it. So this is an example of why when we're planning this out, you if you want to put downriggers on, consider that probably along the gunnel up near the middle part of the boat is not necessarily where you want the downrigger. You'll want that moved back. So this is obviously a crowding situation, makes it very difficult to grab a rod, and just simply it's really just kind of a bit of a pain. All right. All right, getting into mounting our downriggers. So again, we're talking about downriggers here near the rear part of your gunnels. This is closest to the stern of the boat as you can, but also not too far where you're ending up reaching over the back of the boat or reaching over seats or whatever it is that you have at the back of the boat that makes it cumbersome. You want to be able to get to that rod real quick and pull it out of the rod holder, out of the downrigger very, very easily. No restrictions between you and the downrigger. So mounting that could be in a placement that is just in front of, let's say, a platform. So, in an area that you can simply get to that downrigger. I mentioned gimbal mounts. So sometimes with big saltwater boats, fishing boats, they come with a gimbal mount. A gimbal mount is really a built-in rod holder that goes right into the gunwale, and it has a pin at the very bottom. And you can buy mounted on a track. You can buy a gimbal mount tube that slides into that rod holder and locks into place on that pin. And now you can put your downriggers, your rod holders, and that sort of thing right into the gimbal mount. So that's certainly an idea. We already talked about the ratchet rod holders. Mark mentioned or showed the Scotty, or sorry, not the Scotty, the Canon. And there's also other makes as well. So those are ratcheting, and they're able to tip up at an instant just by grabbing the rod. You can simply tip the whole rod holder up and then slide the rod out of the tube. Makes it very, very easy to get the rod out, especially under pressure. If you have a big salmon on, peel and drag, sometimes it's real tough to be able to get that rod out of a rod holder. A ratchet type rod holder is certainly handy because of that. All right. No bananas on the boat. Always plan not to have bananas on the boat. All right. So I think that should be about it for rigging. Mark, is there anything else that we need to talk about when it comes to rigging?
No, I think, does anyone have any, we could just take a couple minutes. Does anyone have any questions up into this point about that? If you raise your hand, Shane will see you and he can unmute you. See anyone in the gallery there?
Yeah, I'm just looking. Somebody's asked if we have the fireplace going. Do you have the fireplace going at Grimsby Tackle? Oh, good. He's keeping warm. Well, you know what? It's a beautiful night. I'm actually in my garage. It's got to be 10 degrees outside. Beautiful out. You know what, Mark? I don't have any questions in here.
Did you, Rob?
I'm sorry?
Rob Wiersma, I thought he raised his hand.
Okay. Let me just see. Okay, so I'm just going to go back to, I'm going to unshare my screen. Stop sharing. There we go. All right, and then we can go back to our view as well. So you can change to gallery view if you wish to see everybody. And then if anyone has a question, you can certainly lift your hand and I'll take you off mute. I see Rob does, so let me just unmute. Rob, go ahead.
So you're not a fan of the Scotty plastic holders, or the what do you call them? They're kind of like stainless ones.
Well,
go ahead, Mark.
They do. Scotty's got a bunch of different ones. There's one in particular that is quite good for divers. I believe that's the Orca, or the I could have been mistaken. It is a diver specific rod. It does have some kind of a stainless bracket that goes around it. That one is suitable for divers. It's much more robust than some of their other ones. Okay. And I'm not knocking any of Scotty rod holders at all. They're well made, but they all have their different functions and I'd say maximum capability for different presentations.
Because I've found, like on my boat, I've got the plastic ones, Scotties, and I've also had the stainless or whatever you call it. But the stainless ones fit right into the whatever you want to call it, the base. I've lost 3 of those just simply by pulling them out when you get a fish on. Whereas the plastic ones are screwed in and they're anchored, and obviously you can't lose those. So.
Talking about like the tube style, Rob?
Yeah. I've got both tube style ones now. The chrome ones or the silver ones, they fit into the pedestal right into the bracket, whereas the plastic ones are bolted in, and obviously you don't lose the plastic ones, but I guess they're not as strong.
Okay. So. Is it the Scotty?
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I get you.
Okay.
Yeah, I think Andrew has a question. Shane?
When you're running your V, what's the depth difference between your downriggers and your dipsies? Like if you got a dipsy on a number 3, going out each side.
Yeah, I think, good question. Like, normally, the downriggers, they're straight down, and your divers can be set. You can run them high or you can run them deep. But the general principle is you usually have your most inside lines are your deeper ones, and then you go shallower as you go away from the boat. So sometimes your divers will cover that middle water, and then if you're running anything on planer boards, those will cover the top water. But those are guidelines, to say the least. Like those rules and suggestions can be broken different times. Like there are times where we'll have a diver up high, but we might have a copper or a lead core on a planer board that's maybe deeper than that, and that can affect, when you're trying to land a fish and swing it around the back of the boat to land. And that all comes with experience about how to handle that given situation.
Like, are you running like 20 feet difference or something? Like what's?
Well, that's hard to say because, let's just say, you can have a diver out on a number 3 setting that's 90 feet out, and, you got 90 feet of line out behind the boat. And it's probably, depending on some situations, it's maybe, 25 to 30 feet down. So and then your downrigger can maybe be 50 feet down with a 20-foot lead behind it. So that's all subject to change. That's kind of stuff we might get into a little bit more when we talk about setting lines with the different devices shortly.
Okay.
All right, Mark, can you see me on my phone here?
Yeah, I see you out in the boat there. Good question, though.
Okay. Yeah, I just wanted to give a kind of a showing of some of the work that Martin had done. He placed a track, for an example, along my gunnel there, and you can see that I had a bit of a concaved approach to my gunnel where it's sweeping backwards. He was able to warm up the track itself and do a bend on it, which wasn't too drastic of a bend, but still was able to slide my downrigger base. So this is your typical downrigger that you see, the Scotty 2100 series style, and it's just on a
riser,
a bracket, yeah. So from there, I mean, we can get into, putting stuff on a rail mount. So this was done by Trojan Tackle. Dave, certainly a good guy, does a lot of custom work, really good quality, guys. He's from Burlington, really like his work, putting this together for me. So again, 2 salties there, and then also a tube style rod holder for my downrigger. And then you get into that whole bird tree scenario. And again, this is a little bit more forward on the boat, as you can see. And this is an adjustable style one where we can change the angle of all of my rod holders on the tree itself and have them angled. So you can tell that, this one is sweeping back a little bit further, which I really, really do like when we're talking about running copper down the chute. I'll just run that right off this rod holder, and it's down just out of the way of the downrigger and over top of the diver rods. There's no conflict there. And then the top tubes would be my planer board rods. So just a lot of versatility there. This particular tree was made by Magda Sport Fishing out of Stony Creek, and I really do like that style as well.
Roy Bender is a
yep, that's right.
So all right, that's good, Shane. I think we're gonna transition now. We're gonna talk. We might come back to this stuff a little bit. If anyone has questions that come to mind, we're going to kind of transition now into talking about the different devices and the rods and the reels. We're going to start kind of at the basics for those that are just wanting to get out, and maybe you're not. We're going to talk for the type of angler who maybe is just starting or only plans to fish, a few outings here and there on Lake Ontario and or Lake Erie, and then we'll get into more of the additional stuff to use for both scenarios. But it just came to mind a couple of things that we did miss that are nice things to add when you're thinking about setting up the boat. One of the most important things is your sonar, your GPS unit. Most years ago when we were first starting, you only had a sonar on your boat, and it was, a pretty basic one at that. And if you wanted a GPS those days, you needed to have a handheld one because there wasn't many dual units available. Now it's standard for a lot of units to be both having a GPS built in with the sonar, and that's very important, for safety and navigation wise, but also for they come loaded, or you can purchase the chips, which have your contours in them. I got one right here. This is just for an example, the Lake Master one, which I believe is for Hummingbird, but there's Navionics for Lowrance and Simrad, and all the other units have some sort of software available that have all the depths and contours. Very important, when you're fishing around big structure areas like the Niagara Bar or off Toronto with the spit drop off there. And also, you know, with obviously with navigation, you know, being able to hit your waypoints and going back to your productive areas. And it's always good to have one good unit at the helm. You know, it's recommended, you know, when time and expenses allow, to have a second unit at the helm, depending on the size of your screen. You know, putting a split screen on a 5-inch unit can be hard, you know, squinting if you're looking at both your sonar and your map. But if you were to have twin 5-inch units or 7-inch units, depending how much room you have, you can have one for each function. And of course, nowadays there's other functions like down and side imaging, which is a little bit more for bass and walleye and more shallower water fishing. But there's also, you know, if your boat is a little newer, you can have all your smart gauges on your screen too, to display all the information for your motor too. But another thing that's been trendy the last number of years is guys are putting a small unit on the back of the boat. This is probably for larger boats that are maybe 18 feet or bigger, where there's more space from the console to the back. So the guys who are working the rods at the back of the boat, they're able to see, you know, when fish or bait come in, and they can adjust their downriggers or their lines quickly and accordingly, instead of squinting up at the front of the boat trying to see things. As well, you know, the advantage of having a second unit is backup. If one were to fail, you would still have one to fall back on, especially for navigation, trying to get back to your port or your launch ramp. So another nice thing to add in time, it's not necessary, but it can make a world of difference some days, and that is the fish hawk. Well, that's here. Any down speed unit will work. You know, years ago, many of us were using the Subtroll or the Depth Raider, and they still work very well. But the Fishhawk has a few nicer features, and you know, knowing the temperature below the surface is important, but even more important is knowing the speed, whether you're going in or out of a current. And because just because you're going 2.5 miles on your GPS doesn't mean your spoon is traveling at 2.5 miles down below. It could be much faster or much slower down there. And you want to make sure you're going the right speed, that whatever bait is going, your bait is, you know, swimming or wobbling properly at that right speed. And you want to know what the fish are, and you can replicate the same presentation once you dial them in, so to speak. So we can get more in depth with that stuff another time, but a down speed temp unit is certainly a nice upgrade for if you plan to put in a lot of time, mostly on Lake Ontario, but it also has advantages on Lake Erie too.
Mark, I just got a question that came in. Sorry, this got a lot of feedback. He's asked if there is, he's discovering that there's a lot of blowback in his downrigger, and tips to avoid this. He says he's just bought a 13-pound pow weight and is looking forward to using it, but before that it was only 10-pound downrigger weights. Mark, do you want to take that?
Yeah, no, totally. Yeah, blowback. That's when you a lot of swing in your downrigger cable. Ideally, you want your cable line to be as, you know, vertical as possible in most circumstances. And we always recommend to use the heaviest cannonball, or not cannonball, trolling weight that you can that your downriggers can handle before maxing out the motor. Or if you're using, you know, if you're a manual, generally more than 12 pounds is too much for manual downriggers, because you want to have a nice presentation, and so that your downriggers are nice and tight, and your baits are going nice and properly through the water. And the POW weights is one good brand out there these days. There's other ones. There's the Titan weights, and there's Sharks, and there's but the slimmer and the torpedo ones too as well. The more slimmer aerodynamic design, the better it tracks through the water as well. There's another one that's kind of a hybrid between a ball and a fish shape. It's the bullet ball, which is another locally made product by Dave Lyles and All Tool Manufacturing out of Stony Creek too. And I've used it, and it tracks very nicely through the water as well. So we'll talk about cannonballs or trolling weights a little more. But generally, as a minimum, like 10 pounds was the standard for many years. But now, you know, some of us are fishing much deeper throughout the summer, and I'd say 12 to 13 is a good minimum for most applications. Whereas 15, if you're using Canon Mag 10s, you know, the Scotty 1116s or the 2116s, they can certainly handle a 15-pound weight if you, the angler, is comfortable using them.
Mark, I got a bullet ball right here, actually. This is one of the bullet balls that we were just mentioning. So just a bit of background on this. I mean, the POWs are awesome as well as these. And the design of the bullet ball from a friend of ours was because he's also he has a business of ballistics, and the design of bullets, he used the very same thought process in designing the bullet ball. So this one's a 14-pound. Very, very good. I've used it on my boat this year. I really like it as well.
And I was just had a note here. I was reminded, Brad, who's the owner of POW Weights, he's going to be, he donated one of these for all of the participants here tonight. There's a shot for one of you to win one of these. And I think the easiest way for us to do that is if you just fire a message, either via Facebook to the Grimsby Tackle account or an email to the Grimsby Tackle at kojico.net address, and just say thank you for the seminar tonight, and we're going to take all those names, and on Monday we'll do a draw, and for all the participants that do that, we'll get a shot. So maybe do that shortly. We'll remind you guys at the end of the seminar. But thanks to Brad for donating that.
Yeah, that's great. Got a question that came in. Fellow was asking, does anyone offer a glow-in-the-dark cannonball? And if so, do they have it in fish shape? And what's your thoughts?
Yeah, I haven't used one yet, but they are available. I know Titan, and that's Ryan Hare, who he charters out of Toronto during the summer. He started up the Titan trolling weights last year, and they are a real nice aerodynamic fish weight. He's got a glow version. I think Brad is also working on a glow one too for POW weights. So I think there's a time and a place for it. I guess we could talk very briefly though, color of trolling weights and pros and cons to it. I kind of like mine, kind of how I like my divers. I like them neutral. I usually use black ones. I don't really want to think about it too much, but I think there are times where maybe a cannonball can attract a fish into your spread, just like a colored dipsy diver can work with your spoon. And so that's my take on color. I think you're more or less the same too, Shane, right?
Absolutely. Mine is almost all black. They're all flat black. I don't get much into color. I mean, back in the 80s, we used to run orange and green. It used to be the thing where even chartreuse cannonball, I remember on the charter boat, we had a chartreuse cannonball. It seems like that had gone away once the zebra mussels came into the Great Lakes, in particular in the middle of the 1990s, where the water clarity just all of a sudden went from what it was pea green beforehand to gin clear. So at that point, then we started to look at ways of being a little more stealthy, and that's when black and flat black came in.
All right, so moving on. If anyone has any more questions, just make a note or.
Malcolm's got his hand up. Malcolm Thomas. I can unmute you, and if you have a question, certainly go ahead. If not, you can drop the hand as well. Nope.
Sorry about that.
Oh,
I put it up hand earlier, so you can forget about me. Great seminar, guys.
Oh, thanks. How have you been?
I'm doing great with three of us watching it here.
Oh, wonderful.
So we just devoid of COVID, so we're having a beer.
Why not? Well, welcome. Thanks so much for participating. This is great.
Thanks.
All right.
Okay, so we're going to get more into rods and reels and presentations now. And so we're going to talk first about those that want to get in on some Great Lakes fishing. They kind of want to do it on a soft budget and with you know, just the basics that you need to get going first. And you don't need downriggers to catch salmon on Lake Ontario, and you certainly don't need them on Lake Erie to catch walleye. Ideally, we're going to talk about a 4-rod spread. You know, one person in the boat and a partner. So, you know, on both lakes, you're allowed 2 rods per person right now. And you want to make sure you got 4 good rod holders at least set up. That's ideal. And if I were to pick 4 rods combos to get going, it would be, to start, it'd be 2 diver setups. And by Dipsy diver setups, those that don't know, this is a diver. That's the generic term. You know, there's different brands out there: Lure Jensen, Dipsy diver, and the deeper diver is now owned by Dreamweaver. It was brought in by Walker over 10 years ago, and they function very easily. They got a keel weight on the back. You can adjust it. It's got a dial on there, and you can tune it if you want it to go away from the boat on your port side or away from the boat on your starboard side, or if you want it to dive straight down behind the back of your boat. And generally, we have 1 on each side going each way. There's a 1, the 2, and the 3 setting, and also a half setting for both. And they come in different sizes. Got a few other little ones here. We call these guys more cookie divers. There's like 2 or 3 of these other little sizes. We don't use them often. They're more used for shallow water fishing. But this is the 107 if it's a Dreamweaver, or the #1 diver if it's a Lure Jensen Dipsy diver. It's the most common one. You can fish it in shallow water, you know, like 20 or 30 feet. Ideally, I like using the smaller ones in 30 feet or less. And these are good. These will reach, if you're using wire, 80 plus feet down, and or if you're using braid, they'll get, you know, 60, 70 feet down easily as well. But two braid setups using 40 to 50 pound test braid is what I would suggest, with a 9 to a 9.5 foot medium heavy Dipsy diver rod. And those rods are not expensive at all. There's different like Shimano and Okuma, for example, and even Daiwa. They've got models that come in around $45 to $60. Nice quality entry-level rods that'll do the trick for that. And you can fish spoons behind these, or you can fish worm harnesses, or even crankbaits and flashers and flies, anything behind these. Generally, I've got a snubber on here. We're going to talk about that in a bit. Generally, you have anywhere from a 5 to maybe an 8 foot leader. I would recommend for those starting out, don't have your leader any longer than the total length of your rod. It'll be a little difficult to maneuver. There are advantages to having longer leaders sometimes for more experienced guys, but 6 to 8 feet is generally pretty adequate. And if you're using a spoon or a worm harness behind it, anywhere from 20 to 30 pound test fluorocarbon is the ideal line to use. So this is a snubber. There's many debates all the time about whether you should use a snubber or not, and the advantages or disadvantages. Myself, I use a snubber, and what a snubber does is it's stretchy. It's like a shock absorber, and it takes the idea is that it takes the impact, you know, when a salmon or a trout hits. They hit very hard. You know, it absorbs that shock, so it'll keep from your your leader line from breaking. I will use a snubber when I'm salmon and trout fishing, and I'm using a spoon. So like a 20 to a 30-pound leader, or maybe lighter if it's early in the spring and the water's clear, I might use a 15-pound test leader. That's when I'll have a snubber on. I won't use a snubber if I'm walleye fishing, because as we know, walleye, they taste great, but they don't strike very hard or fight very hard, so it's not really necessary. And I feel a snubber could maybe lead to not getting a good hook set. It's just not necessary for walleye fishing. And I personally do not use a snubber if I'm using a flasher and a fly, or a flasher with a herring or a meat rig behind my diver, because I will use generally 40 to 50-pound test monofilament line going from my diver to my flasher. And I feel there's some stretch there in that monofilament. And I also will adjust my drag on my reel accordingly, that it doesn't require that. I feel I get a good hook set still, and able to land most of my salmon without a snubber. That's personal preference. I would probably suggest maybe using one for the first little bit if you're just starting out for salmon fishing with divers. Use one at all times until you get comfortable, you know, with your drag settings on your reel and other things like that. And you find out there are little ways that you tweak things your own way. But that's how I do that myself. So divers are a good cheap way to get lines in the water and away from the boat when you're just starting out. You can run one on each side easily. You can run two divers on each side. You can have one on a 1.5 setting and one on a 3 setting. So one will go down and a little bit away from the boat, and the other one will go down and even wider away from the boat by adjusting those settings accordingly. Now, to get 2 more lines in the water, there's a couple of different ways you can go about it. And again, we're still talking without the use of downriggers for those with smaller boats and just starting out. You could get 2 more braid setups, but I think maybe with some lighter line on the braid, 20 or 30-pound test on those. And you can use snap weights or tadpoles. So this is a tadpole right here. It's made by Offshore Tackle, and they're like a little bent, kind of like a keel shaped device. And they come in a few different sizes, and they both have different, they all have their capabilities of a max depth that they get down. And they dive best with a thin diameter braid line. And they just dive straight down. And then just like a diver, you would tie a similar length lead behind that, and you can fish off a spoon or a worm harness behind them. And then you would let them out using planer boards.
Mark, I just got to make mention here before we move on away from the diver topic. Recent years in the Eastern Basin, we've started to fish a lot of spoons, Wacom tackle spoons, and some of the Dreamweaver super slims and stuff of that sort. But one of the things that we've started doing, instead of a snubber, certainly a snubber is not necessary when we're talking about walleye fishing, but we are trolling faster. And when we're running spoons, there's often this chance. I mean, we're sometimes pumping the speed up beyond 3 miles an hour for walleye. A technique that was, somewhat devised from the Central Basin guys from Port Bruce, Port Burwell, down that way. They did a lot of speed trolling with spoons, and we've adopted that same sort of technique in the Eastern Basin. So our divers, instead of running a snubber, what we're doing is we're running monofilament or fluorocarbon leader, but we're using a bead chain. I hope you can see that, a bead chain at the back of the diver, okay? And that just gives you that much more freedom. Again, we're spinning those spoons at a fairly fast pace sometimes, and that bead chain is certainly helpful. I also find that it protects that leader as well, as if the leader gets caught as you're bringing a fish into the net or whatever, that lighter leader, remember we're lightening things up because of the walleye. We don't need to run 20 or 25 or 30-pound tests. I'm running 15-pound test leaders. So that is all protected on that edge of the diver with that bead chain. protecting your leader. Over the course of a day, catching many, many walleye, bringing them to the net, that will save you a bunch of leaders and maybe some breakoffs too.
Yep. Good point, Shane. They certainly do help with that. So here's also a snap weight, an alternative to using a tadpole device to get your line out. And these are very versatile, and you can use these for many different situations. But just for an example, like for those that are looking to get lines out on planer boards, additionally, offshore tackle in conjunction with precision trolling, and that's Mark Romanuk, for those, maybe the name is familiar for many of you. I want to say nearly 20 years now, he came out with some books, and here's one of them here. This one has all the different dive curves. They did with scuba divers, they did multiple tests, testing out all the different crankbaits and seeing what their maximum diving capabilities are. And they did it with, I think, 10-pound test was the standard for monofilament that they use. And later on, when braid lines became common, they did that. They did tests for that just to. They got away from doing the books years ago, and now they have an app which you can purchase. And they when you buy the app, you get all the updates. And I believe they try and test out as new things, new devices, and new crankbaits hit the market. They test them and get those added on there too. But they have a chart and they have a system, and it's called the 50-50 system, where they have a grid where if you're using, like in this case, a 1 ounce weight on a offshore clip, if you let 50 feet of line out and then you put on a clip with a 1 ounce weight and you let out another 50 feet into the water, and then you put on your planer board, they've got a chart, and it's all dependent on your speed, approximately how deep you are in the water. And obviously, if you're going slower, you'll be deeper, and if you're going faster, where you're using more weight, faster, you will be shallower, but using more weight or going slower, you will be deeper. So we have those charts here available at the store. If you when you come in, you don't have them yet, you can take a picture of them. They also did a book out. I had it, it's right here. They had this version out where they tested all the divers, and they got the charts for all the deep sea divers, deeper divers, jet divers, copper and lead core, and again, that's all available on the app. And I highly recommend, if you're not able to find a used book somewhere, then get the app. That information is invaluable to, all of it. There's different factors day to day, how the current is and what type of line you're using, the devices, where your device is in the water, your bait is in the water, but at least kind of getting a good ballpark, within 5 to 10 feet can make a world of difference between catching some fish or catching a bunch of fish. So anything to add on that, Shane?
No, I do have a couple of questions that have come in. James Sawyer had asked, how long is your release clip off the cannonball? And another is along the same lines, or associated with that question, is a lead length behind the downrigger. So it's all personal preference when it comes to the release clip itself behind the downrigger. First, I'm going to show you this. This is the probe. This is an X4 probe from Fishhawk that would be suspended just above the downrigger weight. And at the back of the downrigger weight is this attachment of a release clip. And I'm pulling it and pulling it and pulling it. And there's the length of mine. It's almost about 4.5 feet, 4 feet at least. That's the length of my release clip off of the downrigger. But that's just in my preference for when I'm fishing more on a finesse type scenario. So if I'm fishing for walleye, for an example, that long, lengthy release clip certainly gives me lots of play. Okay, so the downrigger's down in the water column, and this release clip has lots of play. You can tighten it up, but when a fish hits or starts to bite, it starts to move that release clip, and you'll see it a whole lot more with that longer release clip. So you can pull the rod out of the release clip and bring in your walleye. Salmon and trout fishing, however, Mark, I hope, do you have a Black's release clip there?
I do. I'll go over that.
Okay.
So, yeah, we probably should have touched on this maybe a little bit more when we were talking about downriggers. But there are essentially, I'd say, two styles of clips on the market that are the most common. Shane just showed you that was the Scotty one. You know, the pinch pad release, offshore, Walker. There's been other brands that do a pinch pad release as well. But there's also the Blacks one, and it's the style that I've come to like to use, and we use that on my friend Carl's boat when we're tournament fishing. It's this style, and this exact style is actually it's made by Dreamweaver, and it incorporates a snubber in with the release, but don't mind that part so much. We're just going to focus right now on the actual release clip part. And the way it works is you would clip from here, you would have your downrigger attached, and then up here you would connect to your cable or your downrigger line. And then this arm will open up, it clips in, you open it up, and then the idea is you take your downrigger monofilament line and you twist it about 5 times in your hand, and you put the loop inside of it. And then when a fish is on, it pulls the loop will pull open the pin, and then you're free to fight the fish. And it actually does no damage to the line at all, contrary to, you know, what you might think. And it's nice because it is an adjustment gear. You'll see right there, you can, you know, if you're fishing walleye, you can make it looser so that those shy biters will pop it easier. Or if you're fishing really deep for salmon, you're using a big flasher, you can set it tighter so you don't get as many false releases. I like to set them really tight as well. And another thing we should talk about when you're setting your downriggers, you always want to have them bent, your rod bent over as much as possible in the rod holder when it's set. I know sometimes you know, when you're trolling past the boats, you see some guys, their rod tips are kind of up in the air. There's not a lot of tension there. The more loaded up that your downrigger is, the better hook set you're going to get, and because there's going to be less slack line. And you'll also be able to tell if you have a like a shaker, a very small salmon on, or maybe a lake trout where they don't pop the release, but your rod tip just kind of quivers or shakes a little bit. So always have your downriggers bent over and set as much as you comfortably can manage for that. And as far as like having your lines behind, like in your releases, you know, I think the question was maybe how far back. Like some days, you know, when we're salmon fishing, we're maybe as close as 10 feet off the ball. But if we're walleye fishing, or if it's middle of the day for salmon, we've got to get a little stealthy. They could be anywhere, you know, 70 to maybe 100 feet. That's kind of extreme. I generally am not longer than 50 feet on some days. Even in the springtime out with the spoon, 50 feet is where I try to max out on. And one other thing just about rigger release placement. I know Shane had his release coming off the ball, off the tail that way. I've come to, after playing around for a few years, I like having mine up here coming off. So you see where my release is, and this is the Scotty one. It's got a clip here, this style. Scotty has many different styles available. So I like to have it right here. So it's a little easier for when I bring my downrigger up to the surface. I can reach my clip pretty good. This one's, I think 18 inches long. The length of the line from here as well. And I like it above. I don't like it attached to the weight myself, because if I'm using a flasher, you know, they're rotating pretty hard through the water, and I don't want it to kind of cause my bait or my rigger to wobble at all. It stays straight, and meanwhile my flasher is up here away and doing its thing as well. So that's just my personal preference on it. Was there any more questions, Shane?
Along the same lines is about the lead lengths. So I wanted to mention a little bit about that. That lead length is a lot to do with what style of baits you're running, and how aggressive those fish are, how curious those fish are, and whether they're willing to bite as close to the boat as possible. So again, we're always trying to bring fish in that are aggressive, that will bite closest to the boat first. So sometimes in the morning, our lead lengths could be short, and then as the morning progresses, the sun is up, the fish maybe become a little more shy. We end up lengthening some of our leads. So that's kind of a tricky question. It's one of those things that you, over time, will build up a kind of an understanding. What you're seeing on the sonar, are you finding that the hooks are coming in to look at your downrigger, or are they now all of a sudden stopping? They're not doing that, but you're still catching some fish. Maybe that transition, you'll start to see, maybe first thing in the morning, your downriggers are getting firing off, but then all of a sudden things slow down on them, but now your divers and your cores are going off and your riggers have gone quiet. There's an example also where maybe you want to lengthen your leads on the downriggers. There's always a point where it makes no sense. You're going to get to that point where, hey, 45, 50, 100 feet back, now you're starting to get into, well, why am I doing this now? I should just, maybe put something else out that would get those fish to snap. So, you're always trying to think of the next best move. But again, look for the aggressive fish, especially first thing in the morning, and then start to think about, if those aggressive fish aren't biting anymore, lengthen those leads. Mark?
And one more thing I wanted to show you. So you might be wondering what this is. This is also a snubber, and it's made by Scotty, and it's something I highly recommend. It's very inexpensive. It's less than $10. It's very strong and tough. And what it does is it takes the impact away from your downrigger and all of your mounting. It just absorbs the shock of that, especially on choppy days, of that 10 to 15 pound weight bouncing around there. It just gives everything a nice cushion, and I've never heard of this style ever failing on anyone. That's just what I've heard, and I would highly suggest one as just one of those nice little things to have that doesn't cost much but gives you a little peace of mind. It's just the Scotty snubber. Like I said, Dreamweaver also. I don't know if this is still in production. I have to check on that. But this is a Dreamweaver's version that I really like to use on my boat. And it has the black style release with the snubber built in on it. So moving forward about getting lines in the water. So ideally to get four lines in the water on a fixed budget, or just for those starting out, 2 dipsy divers, with 9 to 9.5 foot rods, and about a 30 size reel, or the same equivalent. Different reel manufacturers have their different sizes. This is one of the most common ones out there. It's the 30 size Okuma convector line counter. It's a very nice reel. It's the mid-range size. You can fill it up with a lot of 40 to 50 pound test braid, and it'll last a long time. Just a nice quality reel to get started with. Another one that's of similar size, value, and quality, Penn has their Warfare out as well. So those are the 2 that I would suggest for that. And then for your other lines, the other 2 we were talking about, if you're using snap weights, you can use the same size reels, or you can maybe get away with a size smaller, whether it be like the 20 size convector or 15 size Penn reel, and with 20 to 30 pound test braid. Now, another thing that you can use is a lead core line to get line out on off to the side with planer boards. We're going to talk about lead core in a few minutes and kind of break down what it is and how it works. But we're just going to talk about planer boards now, inline ones to be more specific, and they're very handy to use on smaller boats, even on larger boats. Big boats that are capable of using masts, sometimes they prefer to use these. There's an argument that you know, mast setups versus the inline boards, you know, which better. But I think different days, if you have the choice to use both, they can have their advantages, depending where you're fishing and what you're trying to accomplish. So this is the Church walleye board. The other one that's very comparable to this is the offshore. They have one in this size. And last year, Dreamweaver introduced their own one. And it's after much use this summer, I've come to, it's now my preference for this size to use. I'll just demonstrate very quickly why that is. I had a piece of strap line here. So on the way planer boards work is, for those who may not be familiar with them, they come in a left or a right-hand side. This is the right-hand side. Obviously, you know, it's got the green top too for starboard. And they plane away from the boat, kind of like how a dipsy might. You clip your line in here. In this case, put it in the back.
Let's lift it up a little bit, Mark.
Right here.
Yeah, there we go. Now we can see it.
Just one sec here. So here it is, and you got your line here going to the back. You have an arm or a release here, kind of in the middle to the front side, and then you have a rear spot too. And and all they do is they kind of act like a bobber. You know, once they're away from the boat, they just kind of wobble through the water. And then knowing how to judge when you have a fish on, you'll see that they'll sometimes start to go back away from the boat some. And if you have your clicker on your reel, it'll start, you know, click, 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 click. You know, if it's a smaller fish, or it'll really start buzzing if it's a good fish screaming. But you know, and you'll also be able to judge if you have debris on it too, if it's you know, sagging back or not you know, flowing through the water properly. And the reason why I like these type is they have a button here on the top, and with one push of the button, it opens up both the front arm and the back one, so it's very easy to release with one hand. With the other setups, you know, I'm just going to rig it up here. You'd have to, you know, with both hands, you'd have to take it off the first release clip and then off the back. And for those who haven't fished planer boards very much, when you're fighting a fish, the idea is to get that planer board off as quickly as possible without creating any slack line. At the back of the boat, sometimes you've got the guy on the rod, and you'll have someone at the back, you know, taking it off for the guy fighting the fish. And it's just nicer to have that quick push button and getting that off nice and quick and cleanly, and keeping the line tight and increasing your chances at landing the fish. So,
Mark, on our walleye talk that we'll have later in the winter, we should really maybe talk a lot about the inline planer boards, techniques on bringing fish in and that sort of thing. It certainly would bode well. There is a question here about, do you have offshore boards in stock?
We currently don't right now. We will have them probably February, March, but we don't yet. We do have some Church and some Dreamweavers kicking around right now. We're processing all of our orders right now because obviously it was a busy summer, and we're low on stock currently. So, and yeah, when we talk about that on our next one too, Shane, obviously you can spend a whole hour talking about different ways of rigging and using planer boards, and you know, upgrading different release clips or setting things differently. There's no right or wrong way to do it. The planer board has been tweaked over a dozen times in the way it's rigged. So just kind of scraping the surface on that tonight. So
yeah, absolutely.
That's 4 rods, you know, getting them out. You know, 2 divers and a planer board, or you can fish, if you're in shallow water, you can fish just crankbaits too, which is common, you know, early in the spring when we're fishing browns and then salmon in Lake Ontario. Just fishing, you can fish, you know, 2 crankbaits or stick baits. You can have 2 straight off, one off each corner right off the back of the boat, and then 2 additional ones off to the side with planer boards, or, you know, 2 off the back of the boat, and you can run divers with spoons. So there's many different ways to get lines in the water without using downriggers and with using just a few minimal devices. And in the store here, we're more than happy to discuss that more and further and break it down for you if you have any more questions. We're going to talk downriggers. I think we've kind of covered that. They're pretty straightforward. We'll just talk about the base, some of the setups that we use to get started. Again, the CV, a mid-size line counter reel like this or any other comparable size will do. If you're fishing earlier in the spring, if you only fish mostly in the springtime on Lake Ontario for salmon, and then maybe you move on to other things, whether you go up north more or you move on to Lake Erie, 15 to 20 pound test monofilament will be adequate because you know, you're likely just going to fish crankbaits or spoons off these. In the summertime, I would say from June on the downriggers, we like to upgrade our line to 25 to 30 pound test. And that's to compensate because we're fishing deeper and we're going to use more flashers off our downriggers more often. And we need that extra strength. And as well, the fleas will come out for a few weeks in the middle of summer when the temperatures spike. And the thicker line just kind of helps repel them a little bit better. But again, if you're just fishing Lake Erie mostly, or a little bit on Lake Ontario, 15 to 20 pound test monofilament will be adequate. So we'll talk a little bit more about fishing with divers and the different types of line. Like braid is the most common, and it's what we suggest people use when they're first starting out. It's, you know, it's pretty user friendly. It's easy to use. We don't suggest using monofilament for dipsy divers very much at all because it stretches, and when you have to trip it to by tripping, where'd my diver go? So by tripping is if you want to, you know, you have your line out, but you want to bring it in to change up a lure or something, you got to pop the release and bring it in. But if you got monofilament line, it's stretchy, and it takes a lot to actually get that to pop. With braid and wire, which we'll talk about, without stretch, they pop easily to bring back in. As well, braid line and wire line get down a lot deeper than monofilament does. So again, 40 to 50 pound braid is what we suggest using in most cases for both lakes. We're going to talk about wire now, and there's a lot of different terminology that gets used, and it's easy to confuse some of the different wires that are out there. So for using divers, for the most part, and there's a few different brands out there. I'm showing you what we have right here right now. It's Malin braid or Malin brand. It is 30 pound test, 7 strand, and that is the most common type of line. You know, whether it's Malin or Mason, Torpedo, or American fishing wire. I found them all in that same 7 strand, 30 pound test to be pretty comparable lines. And they don't stretch, and they repel the fleas a lot better than braid does. Braid will still pick up some fleas pretty badly in the heat of summer, but the wire tends to slice through the water, and you don't accumulate very many at all. And there are times too, we believe that wire, you know, gives off a hum and some vibration in the water, just like our downrigger cables do. And there are many theories that it attracts the fish on some days as well. And 1,000 feet of this will fit on a 30 size series convector, or a 30 or 20 size series pen, or a 600 series Dakota very well without needing to use any backing. Wire, it requires, you got to be careful with it. You don't want to kink it. You always want to try and keep it as tight as possible. I like to put a little bead ahead of when I tie on my snap swivel to the end, and it keeps me from reeling up into the guides as well. I always keep that attached. I hardly ever retie that snap swivel unless I feel that it needs to be. Like every few weeks, I'll just do it out of a maintenance type of thing. But I always keep that on because I try not to break down my diver rod at all. I always try and keep it intact in one piece, just to keep that wire line in good shape. So this is the wire that we use for divers. There's copper line. We're going to get into that in a sec. We don't use copper in conjunction with dipsy divers. We don't use lead core in conjunction with dipsy divers. And we don't use weighted steel either with dipsy divers. Those all function on their own. So it's easy to kind of get confused by the different names and terms of when we're talking about wire for divers. So is there any questions on that, or did I miss something, Shane, that you'd like to add?
Not really. There's been a few questions, but thankfully, when they've been addressed to everyone. So others have chimed in and answered them, which is wonderful. Okay. Mark, we're at 8:30 now. You want to talk a little bit about copper and lead core, and then field a few questions, and then wrap it up?
Yeah, we can certainly do that. And the way copper and lead core and weighted steel work is, we'll talk about them a little bit more too, and how we incorporate them with our setups throughout the seasons on both lakes in the next seminars. But lead core is the first one that I would, thought I had. I don't have any lead core with me. So lead core, it's a lead-based line. Like the inner part of the line is lead, and then it's got a Dacron coating for those who have never used it. And it sinks at about a rate, it averages about 5 to 7 feet per 10 yards. And we call it, we measure our lead core, and we judge them by colors, is what we say. So when they come on the spool, every 10 yards is a different color. So the first 10 yards might be red, and then another 10 yards will be blue, and then so on, different colors. And that's how we measure them. So let's say in the springtime on Lake Ontario, a 5 color is pretty popular in late April or early May when we're fishing kind of in that 30 to 40 foot water, because it'll get down, around anywhere 20 to 25 feet on average. So, we're talking amongst ourselves, we'll say, yeah, the 5 color line was going good today. That's, 50 yards or 5 colors of lead core line, and it sinks in the water on its own. And to bring, generally we fish spoons or crankbaits off the lead core line, and we put them on the planer boards to get away from the boat. And I'm going to kind of answer a question in advance that I think will be coming soon, because it's rather common, and that's why you see so many of the bigger boats with so many different rods and reels with different lengths of copper and also lead core line. Well, the idea is because since we want to fish these on the planer boards, you can't, it's not a good thing to, like if you had a reel that it had 10 colors of lead core, a 45 size reel, to say, well, I just only want to put 5 colors out. So I want to put 5 out, going to clip it into the planer board and then send it off to the side. That's not a good thing to do, because the planer board clip will damage the coating of that lead core line. And you're also going to have sag in the water from your line coming back from the planer board back to the boat. That's why there's so many rods and reels on some of the bigger boats. It's because they have rods that are set up with 2 colors of lead core on a reel, and then 5, and then 8 and 10, and then so on, and then different lengths of copper on the reels. So that's why there's so many, like, yeah, in the springtime, in that shallow 15, 20 foot water, we really like the 2 color setup as well. So I hope that covers that question that someone might have been thinking of. So, and then copper, it works the same way as lead core, but it's just straight braided copper. This is the Atomic 7 strand, a very popular brand out there. And this is a 300-foot section. Generally, sections that people have on the reels are often by 50-foot or 100-foot increments. A 200 to 300-foot copper is pretty popular for many anglers on Lake Ontario. Copper, the advantage of it is it has a greater sink rate than lead core does. So copper will get down on average about 22 feet for every 100 foot. So if you have a 300-foot copper out, you're going to be getting down 60 plus feet on average. So And generally, as a rule of thumb, like I said, most anglers like to use lead core for their spoons and their crankbaits or worm harnesses. You certainly can use copper for all of those too. I tend to like to use copper more when I'm fishing flashers and flies, or flashers and herring. I want to get them deep and off to the side on with my planer boards. But that's not to say you can't, fish a spoon off copper or a worm harness off copper. You certainly can, and you can fish a flasher and a fly off lead core too on the other side of things too. But just general rules of thumb. But there are times where mixing and matching can pay off in different situations. So any questions at this? I should add one more product too. Relatively new player the last few years, and it's weighted steel. It's kind of more like a copper type of a line, but the construction of it's a little bit easier to handle, and it's got about the same sink rate as copper does. I suppose maybe the only one of the drawbacks to the weighted steel is the connections for connecting to your braid backing line or your leader line. It's not quite as user friendly, but it's still a good product. I know that has caught many anglers many fish too.
Yeah, it comes off the reel nice and smooth too. Sometimes that's the trouble with copper. It's very finicky to come off the reel, especially when starting to deploy your bait out in the water. But that weighted steel is nice and smooth.
Mm-hmm. So, and just very, very briefly to talk about a 4-rod setup for those who do have downriggers on their boat early in the springtime, and by early, let's say mid to late April, a good bunch of anglers are getting out on Lake Ontario. For fishing that 20 to 40 foot water to start, 2 downriggers, generally with spoons stretched back behind them, 30 to 50 feet. And then either using dipsy divers on the sides, with spoons as well, or planer boards with lead core or fishing crankbaits. We're going to get into that more into the next seminar, but that's just a good basic setup for those wanting to fish 4 rods like that, getting started. And then, if you're adding 6 rods or 2 more rods to the spread, and once we're out a little bit deeper, a standard set for many boats is 2 riggers, 2 divers, and 2 planer boards using, I see a question there for John. That's a funny question, John. There's a story behind that. 2 riggers, 2 divers, and 2 planer boards. And then on Lake Erie with 4 rods, early in the season when you're in a little bit shallower, 4 rods fishing crankbaits, 2 off the back of the boat, or 2 planer boards, or even 4 planer boards all spread out in shallow water is a common set. So we'll talk more about that a little more in depth.
Sure. Daryl had a question there about when to choose to use downriggers instead of dipsies or weighted lines. Good question, and certainly it's kind of again, going back to that idea of trying to, you use your gut instinct as to what the fish are doing and how aggressive they are. Setting your lines, particularly for aggressive fish, certainly downriggers would be the choice. Close to the boat, shortest amount of line out to get to depth. And then divers would be second. And then your long lines or junk lines, sometimes copper, lead core, weighted steel, would be your most stealthy format of catching fish. So those are the ones that are furthest away from the boat, often for those fish that are maybe a bit gun shy. They're not interested necessarily in coming in under the boat. They could be forced outward away from the boat as the boat is passing. That is so true in the middle of the day, sun's high, flat calm seas. That's when those fish typically become a little more shy than they would be in the morning, low light conditions, maybe choppy conditions. That would bode well for fish coming in closer to the boat and a little less shy. So you choose your technique based on the fish, not so much on your personal preference. More often than not, you hear from folks, well, I hate lead core. I'll never use lead core. Well, you don't use lead core, you're probably going to miss on a few days during the year where you're not going to catch fish, and those that are using lead core are. So, you know, being adapt to adjusting when the fish, you can't force fish to feed. You have to adjust your baits to catch those fish when they change. Mark?
Yeah. So I saw a question come across, and there's a bit of a small inside joke about, but it is, you know, a valid point, and I probably should have mentioned when we were starting up. A key thing you don't want to skimp on. It's an easy thing to skimp on, and that's your snap swivel choices for your connections, for your lures. So if I were to recommend one size to do all, it would be the size 3, the 60-pound test from Torpedo. So this is their standard one. They actually have 3 levels of their snap swivels for quality. This one is their non-ball bearing size. And I would generally suggest that you do use a snap swivel that has a ball bearing, just so you don't have any line twist. But the size 3, I think, is an adequate size for salmon fishing. More so for spoon connections. If you're connecting to a flasher, I would bump it up one size myself, just out of personal preference. But Torpedo has made some quality snap swivels and greatly improved them over the years. And they have their next one is their standard ball bearing one, and then they have a premium one as well, which is a stronger, more robust with a higher breaking strength too. So you could use a smaller size if you're fishing earlier in the spring when the water's clear. If you're fishing small baits for brown trout, but I wouldn't go any smaller than the size 3 60-pound test for salmon fishing. You can go smaller too for walleye fishing, but very important that you have that ball bearing if you're using harnesses for walleye, like Shane talked about, using the chain swivel as well to keep line twists to a minimum.
Yep, that's great.
Sampo and Spro also make excellent snap swivels as well.
Yeah, don't chimp out on terminal tackle. That's for sure. That'll save you a whole lot of money and not loss of other baits. So we're getting now into 8:40, 20 minutes to 9. So I think we've covered off a great deal of the questions that have come through the chat. Really appreciate all of the feedback, and certainly those that have answered questions as they were coming up, others within the meeting. The meeting reached as much as 49, I believe. I don't know if you saw anything higher than that. 49 participants. That's excellent. And certainly really thankful for all of you for participating today. And thanks to Mark for staying at the store to doing the seminar. He's working overtime here, guys. And certainly, you know, I want everyone to be safe. And we're certainly, you know, from a fishing standpoint, our community, it's not gone quiet. I mean, our fishing clubs are still working hard. You see Mark's sweatshirt there from the St. Catharines Game and Fish. This is our 90th anniversary, folks. This is a pivotal year. It's unfortunate that COVID has happened. We haven't been able to celebrate it with you guys as much as we'd like. But these clubs are still active. We're doing things in the background to keep things going. Your boat ramp, for an example, at the Port Dalhousie ramp, and then just all our general ongoings with the Derby planning. And we still had Kids Day Derby that continue throughout the summer with the St. Catharines Game and Fish. Other clubs as well running all sorts of different events. So we do not sleep when it comes to fishing, because you know, we want to keep our resources the way they are, keep our fishing on the up and up for sure. Mark, any other closing remarks?
Yeah. So again, we're going to do at least 2 more. I think we're in. Probably we'll take a small break now. You know, we're getting into December and holidays and whatnot. But we wanted to at least get this one out of the way with for many guys who are still relatively new to trolling, so I give you some information to kind of digest and go over as you're planning towards next year. And in the new year, we'll do one for sure specifically on Lake Ontario fishing and going through, early spring through the fall and all the techniques we use. And then another evening will be walleye on Lake Erie specific as well. And if we have to do it Zoom, we will. But who knows if we can, even if maybe we did a small crowd, maybe depending on regulations, if we had a controlled crowd in the store while broadcasting live at the same time, maybe we can do that too, because we know there are some people that aren't really capable to use technology, but we want to make sure we can access and get information to everyone as possible. In the meantime, though, Shane and I, we're pretty accessible. If you have any questions, you can
absolutely
shoot Shane an email, or either, I'm at the shop most days, Monday to Friday now, and you can get Shane through email or through our Facebook platforms as well. You can fire us a message, and we're happy to answer any questions you might have about anything that we maybe didn't cover tonight. So I see Rob. Yeah, we'll let you. Rob has some questions he wants to ask once we're done here. In the meantime, too, some other resources that you can brush up on. Great Lakes Angler Magazine. We get all the monthly issues, or I think they're bi-monthly now at the store. Great information for all species on here and lots of techniques. We have some of the old back issues too, if maybe you missed some. Some internet resources, as always, that we encourage. Spoon pullers, message board. A lot of great information from years past on there, even though it may not be as active nowadays. There's still information from over 10 years ago as you dig through the old pages. Same thing for Lake Ontario United and GreatLakesAngler.com. So check those out for those that want some reading to do. Unfortunately, there's no hockey to watch for at least a few more weeks until they figure out what they're doing. So hopefully, you can spend your time brushing up on things. And again, try and research for those precision trolling and all of their other depth curves and devices like that. So I think that's all I got for now. Martin's always available too here at the store if you got any questions about equipment upgrades or rigging your boat scenarios too. So Rob Wiersma, you had something to say?
I bought a side imaging sonar. I mounted it on the front, and long story short, I put it up through the trolling motor with silicone, and it's affected my trolling motor the way it operates. So I'm wondering if I'm better to put it on the back. If that's, I want to use, I bought it mainly for bass fishing for side imaging, but I'm wondering if it's going to be better on the back to use it for trolling as well.
Yeah, like there's some advantages to it. I know I've seen some discussion from some guys that I follow who fish brown trout pretty more than we do here over on the far east side of Lake Ontario, and they're able to they read the structure for that. So it's got a place when you're for shallow water situations, but I don't know so much for deep water stuff. I would probably come in and chat with Martin more about that. Rob, side and down imaging isn't really my wheelhouse. I don't. Shane, you got anything?
Yeah, Rob, I did do a little bit usage of side imaging while brown trout fishing, as Mark had mentioned, and it really did help. So certainly, getting an idea of how steep the bank it tapers down into depth, what kind of texture the bottom looks like. Is it sand bottom, clay, or does it have boulders and rocks? And you can certainly see that on the side imaging, especially. And what I did learn from it is certainly that those browns definitely like a rocky bottom. Those boulder, size. It's really interesting when you see it on the side imaging. But when you troll past it, you catch a fish on it. It's like, I get it now. So it really does help, and that's really when you're shallow trolling, though. The boat is in 12 feet of water or less, and you're scanning out to the side. So you got to interpret. You got to bring. You got to train your brain to look at side imaging for sure. It's completely different, and I certainly am still learning how to do that. I'm certainly not an expert yet.
Now, would you mount it on the back of the boat? I
Yes.
mean your graph. Would you mount it facing the front of the boat, or would you mount it with your other graph?
Well, I have, yeah. Then there's a good reason to have it near the back if you're, looking to have your graph there. It's interesting now, the technology, some of the new technology now, you're not necessarily needing to network all of your sonar units together. They're using Bluetooth across the entire boat, and it's really interesting. So now you're talking about less, not worrying so much about running network cables, throughout the boat. So your bow electronics works with your helm, with the stern. Now you can just simply connect by Bluetooth, and boom, you got your reads on all graphs and your waypoints.
You've opened my eyes up with the brown trout, because I'm going to start to do a lot of really early season brown trout fishing. So I'm going to put the side imaging on the back. Excellent. And see what that does. Okay, thank you. Yeah,
give it a go. All right, thanks, Rob.
Finding the rocks, you'll find the gobies, and that's what the browns are eating, Rob.
Yeah, okay. Yep. Thank you.
All right, that concludes our evening tonight. I think, Mark, I think, again, do you want to just recap on the POW downrigger weight draw?
Again, so again, for those who missed it earlier, Brad Norris from POW Castings, who makes the fish-shaped rigger weights, he's donated one tonight that we're going to give away as a draw. So just to qualify, send a message either to the Grimsby Tackle Facebook page or to their Grimsby Tackle at kojaco.net email, and just to get your name in the draw. And we'll do that on Monday, and we'll announce the winner. So thank you to Brad for doing that. And if you're considering a rigger weight, check them out here. And I think that's all I got. Thanks, Shane, for helping out on the technical aspect. And thanks to everyone who joined us tonight. It was fun. It wasn't the same as being here in the shop by the wood stove, but it's better than not doing it at all.
Absolutely. Thanks a lot, everyone. Have yourself a good evening. Stay safe. We want to see you again in the next seminar.
Okay. Oh, one more thing. For those who came late, we are hoping to record. We recorded this, and we're just going to clean it up and get it uploaded to YouTube in the next week or two, hopefully. And you can recap it again or share it with your friends who might not have missed it tonight. That's it. Have a good night.
Awesome. Thanks, guys.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye. Have a nice evening.